All right. Okay, so we're going to use Flask, right? So the first thing we'll do, we can create an app.py file, all right? And then we'll just do code dot, make this a little bit bigger. And then from here, I'll do from the Flask library, import the Flask class, right? And remember that this is a factory for creating new Flask applications, okay? So the way I create a new Flask app is by doing this underscore name. And this essentially says, what is the file? You know, this name thing references the file that you're in. It tells Flask, like, where does the application live? Okay? And I'll assign this to equal my app. And then from there, you know, we can add different routes. So for that, you need to do the @ sign, right? Because this is a decorator. For those of you who saw the property material, let me just kind of show you this. Okay, so this is saying when somebody goes to the home page, right, slash, the equivalent of like slash ESPN.com, whatever, it then returns this data. Okay, this is the return value. If we want to run this, the easiest way I know how to do this is to do app.run and then pass through debug equals true. That's generally what I like to do. Remember what debug equals true does? It allows us to make changes to the application without having to shut it down each time. Okay? So, and then all we have to do at this point is just run the file. Okay? In the past, when we ran files, lots of times we would do like Python 3-i, right? And the reason for doing -i is it allows us to like pause and dig around in the file. In this case, you know, we don't really have to do that. The reason why is because this app.run, by that I mean we don't have to do the -i. We can just do app.py. So you see that? And now this is running. So the reason why we don't have to do the -i is because this is a server that's running. And a server, like a web server, it listens. Okay, so it's already kind of paused. It's not like running a task and completes. It stays up and running because it's listening for the user to make requests, for some sort of web user to make requests, and then it will send back a response. So let's see this now. We should be able to go to slash, I believe. And we'll go to, I oftentimes just click on this, so I'm pressing command and then click, and there we go. Right, there's our hello world. And because we have this debug equals true, we can just put hello, we can change this to hello everyone, save it, refresh, and it changes. Okay? So, just to review, right, we created our app, and then we said when someone goes to slash, run this function. And this is the return value. Okay? So then the next thing we do is, we kind of let's say we want to have an individual, like a show page, right? So let's do like show player, something like that. And then to begin with, we can do return, Claude Giroux. This is like just the name of any kind of player. It could be an actor, whatever. And then now what happens? Oh, so this. When something breaks in the app, I immediately look to the terminal because it's going to give me my error message. So if I zoom in on this, you can see what it's saying. It has an error in line 9 of NHL app.py. So we can just go to line 9 and we can see kind of what happened. It was trying to evaluate this before I was done typing. So that it should work now. Okay. And now, how do I want to use this? I forgot something very important, which is my route. So I want to maybe do something like players / and then I would love to do this. I would love for somebody to do this / players for now, right? So that returns Claude Giroux. But what I would want to do is be able to kind of pass through the player's name, like here you can see it's Eric, and then have information about that player show up. So the way to do that is to do this kind of alligator the less than greater than. And now you'll see what happens. So if I just, let me just save this. Okay, great. So this is a really nice error. So what it says is, show player got an unexpected keyword argument name, right? So where did that come from? Because we put this as name, right? That means that whatever I put after the slash, you can see this pattern, slash player slash Eric, slash player slash name. What this is doing now is it's taking this value and saying, oh, what you mean to do is call the show player function with name equal to Eric. And the issue is that this function, that's what it's doing, right? It's calling this function show player name equals Eric, but this function doesn't take that, right? So we need to just answer solve the error message. So pass through name here. And then instead of returning Claude Giroux, let's just return name. You see that? And now we can put whatever, Tom, Sally. And so what's happening here? We are, we're making a request. This is, essentially like a parameter, right? That we're passing through. And then this is defining, saying, hey, whatever comes after the slash, call the function below with this argument name, with name equals name. So it's calling the function, calls the function, returns this. Okay? Question, great. Kayla, go ahead.
Okay, so just to make sure I'm understanding this correctly, the returns on these functions, are those HTML? Or those are interpreted as HTML?
So HTML is just a string, okay?
Yes.
Okay, so I think technically it will return, if we look at this, let me see. I think that this will wrap like some baseline HTML in it. But yeah, basically the option that you get to return is either HTML or something else we'll see, like JSON. Essentially like what we saw with an API. But for right now, all we've returned is HTML.
Okay.
All right. So you can either write some HTML, like you can put return and do some like string interpolation, right?
Okay.
We saw that, yeah. But let's do that real fast, and then we'll move on to using HTML. So we'll just put h1 here slash h1 here, and then this will be name. Okay, and we'll just do the player is right. So now let's refresh this. Right, there's our HTML. It's great. Okay, so the player is h1. So the way that this is really annoying, the way to write HTML, especially because these HTML files are like hundreds of lines long. So instead what we'll use is we'll do this render template, okay? And then we can do this templates folder. So far we've used views, and we've set an argument name here that I always forget the name of it, template folder. You see this? So it's very nice, right? I put the cursor right here, and it tells me the various arguments that this class takes. The VS Code does that. So I'm just looking for the right one, and you can even see that template folder, and it says when this is none, it will default to templates. So you can get a lot just from, reading what VS Code is telling us. I think you can also click on this if you want. So you see that? I just pressed Command and then click. And now you can see, like, look at all this documentation built in for us. As well as, so it tells us how to use it, as well as the actual code. All right, so anything you're curious about, you can just press Command and then click on it, and it will take you there, which is pretty cool. Okay, so what do we want to do? So let me go back to here. I'll put my cursor here. It's a template folder. Okay, equals, and we'll say views. So what this is going to do is, I'm going to try to do this render template, all right, and then pass through the name of the file. So this will be something like player.html. Because this template folder says look in the views folder, it's going to look here. for that file. All right, let's see what happens. So, it breaks. All right, again, we can see what happened here. It was kind of moving a little too quickly for us, right? I wasn't done yet, but it tried and it broke. Okay, so now it works. Let's refresh. We're going to try to make it get request to /player/Sally, and this breaks. So all we have to do is just read the error message. It says template not found, player.html. So why is this not found? Because there is no player.html in here. So let's just fix the error message by making a player.html, and we'll just put hello player page, just to make sure that this file is getting rendered. And then we'll refresh, and we're good. Okay, so what happened here was we started using render template. We did player.html, right? And then it's looking in the views folder because of this right here. And it's going to render this HTML. And what's nice about this is now we can, put it H1 or whatever, and start putting more styling and more, use like all the HTML that we know. Okay. Okay, the issue is that we're not using any of the data, right? The user's requesting information about Sally, but we're not using that right now. So the way that we do that is this render template takes an argument, okay? You can kind of see that here too. Template, name, or list. This context is like the variables to make available in the template, right? Really nice if you just read the documentation. So this is going to be like the player name, I guess, right? So this is just, we're literally calling a function, providing a string as the first argument, and then providing any other argument we want, right? And then here, so we're saying I'm going to set player name equal to the name that comes through here. All right? And then to see that, we'll have to use the Jinja. Okay? So now what will happen? We'll make a request here, right? That we'll go to /player/Sally. Then Flask will look for that route. It sees /player/something. So it says, okay, I'm going to call this function with the argument of Sally. Then it calls the render template function, telling it to use player.html in the views folder, and then pass through player name equals name. And then we go over here, and this is going to break. Why? Because this should be called player name. Right? So it's really nice. You have to just be able to track the whole flow, because that's literally what Python is doing, right? You're playing Python. Okay, so now player name equals the name that we're passing through, right? And now let's do this. Hello, Sally. Right, if I did this, if I put back the error, if I have name, this will break. See that? It's just blank. The reason why is because I guess there is no variable called name. We're taking the value of name, right? Which is name is Sally, and we're passing it through as player name. And now here we want to use player name. Okay. So why is this useful? This is useful because, now we can change the player information and the page is dynamic. The same way that you can imagine, if you go to any one of these teams, right, the format looks exactly the same. You have the logo here, you have the name here, you have the games, you have their position in the standings. And if you go to any other team, right, you'll find the same format. Name, logo, exactly the same font, the record, right? The format's the same. So this is what we saw in the last class. I'll continue sharing. Questions about what we just went through?
Yeah, I just have a quick question. Out of curiosity, I know that you pass it through with double curlies. You have player name. If we had just one set of curlies, would that have a different outlet? Would it throw an error? Or would it show something different?
I think it will show the single curlies, right? It will just be literal.
Okay.
So let's see that. So we'll refresh. You see that?
Okay.
So this is called Jinja, right? This format, and you can take a look at how to do this. I mean, the main thing that we showed was let's do the. So next we'll do the slash players, and we can loop through with some Jinja. But any other questions about this? What we covered?
Hey Jeff, the console shows like a debug password. What's that used for?
Let me see. It's what it probably is for. Okay, what this is for is, say we're hosting this. Actually, I'm not quite sure. My guess is, like there could be a way that it's probably like if this is online, like if this is like on AWS or something like that, then maybe somehow we need to use the pin in order to like see the error message. It's probably something like that. I'm not like if there's an error message, a way to like you might want to hide that error message. You know how like here if we go to the wrong route, sometime instead of showing like a 404, this is giving us more information. But you would want to hide that from the user because then they could like hack your site or something like that. My guess is they're saying this thing is used in that regard. I haven't used it in the past though, so I don't know completely.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
So when I run mine, I get that port 5000 is in use. So I just switched to say port 4999 or 5001.
Right.
So I don't get to do debug reports through. Do you know a way I can do that?
You probably can do, but okay. So let's talk about that error. So if you say, so this is the error that's kind of occurring. I'm going to shut this down. So I press Control C to shut this down. And then let me just, we'll navigate to the same page. Okay, so now I'll do Python 3 app.py. So this is telling you where this is running, okay? This 127.0.0.1, this means localhost. It means it's running on your computer, as opposed to this is running on some other computer on on AWS, right? The :5000 is telling you where on your computer it's running. So there's only one process. This is called a port, okay? A port is just a location on your computer. And for every application that's running, it's allocated a port. Okay, so if you're trying to run, so lots of times the reason why you'll get this that error is because maybe you'll do this, you'll run the application here, or you'll have another Flask application running, and then you'll someplace else do Python 3 the same thing, app.py. Okay, so here we have the error. It says address already in use, port 5000 is in use by another program. Either identify and stop that program or start the server with a different port. So, we have two options. So one way to start the server with a different port is you can do like port, and you can see how nice it is about identifying this for me. And it tells me this should be an integer. And also look at this, port. The port of the web server defaults to 5000. So we can change this to like Anthony was saying, like to 4999. You can just change this. Right, and then let's refresh this. I probably have to. We still have this guy running on 5000. You see that? And now we'll do this one, Python 3 app.py. And you see this? Now it's running on 4999. Okay. So both of you can have debug equals true because these are kind of both optional arguments, right? So that's one thing. The second thing is, how do you shut down these like ghost things? I basically Google this error. Let me see. I can Slack you guys. Let's not go there. I might have to Slack it out in order to find it. But you can look for the you can look for this process, things that are using port 5000, and then shut it down. So I'll select that out. Cool. So
Okay.
far what we saw was, using Flask, defining routes, right? These like return values, having these dynamic routes, right? Being able to pass through these parameters, and then rendering template, right? And then we talked about, app.run. We talked about the fact that this is really a decorator. It's almost like saying app.route, and you're basically like passing this function as an argument into here. That's kind of how I think of decorators working. Is it's like we're decorating this function. We're saying let's give this function capabilities such that it sends information back to the browser, things like that. This is not just a normal function. Other questions? Yeah, Serge.
Can you have two functions into one route?
No. So what you can do, like you can always call another function, but one request gets one response. You know what I mean? And always gets the same. You can have an if-else statement. You can do like last times you'll do that for logins, for instance. You'll say like if the user is authorized, then let them in. Otherwise, say sorry, please log in. Right? That will happen. But when you make a request, it's always hitting the same function initial. And then this function, if you want. Right, like right here, it's calling another function. You can have it call other functions. David?
Can you define a function that's not tied to a route and then call it throughout it's like a standalone function.
Yeah,
call it throughout the rest of your code?
Yeah, I mean you can do that. I mean you will do that. Like right, like we can have the function down here, right? We can just be like, or really what we'll do is we'll have this in other files, as well. Like we're gonna tie in our classes to something like this, right? To this.
Got it.
Because really what we'll want to... Anyway, we'll get there in a couple lessons. Other questions? No? Okay. All right, let's do the for loop, and then we'll tie in the database. Yeah, and that would be pretty good. Okay, so, if we do if we kind of want to have multiple players, remember, what is that going to be? That's this app.route should be /players. And then this should show me all the players. So nothing's automatic, right? I have to tell it to, call the function and display all the players. So I'll do this def show players, or just call this players. It's probably fine. This one doesn't need to take an argument. Why? Because there's no there's no like parameter here, right? It's just /players. There's nothing to like select. There's nothing, every time it's displaying all the players. So return, let's say render template, and then we'll call the players.html, and then maybe this will pass through like a list of player names equals this list of Sally, Eric, Susan. Okay. So now you can just, run. Let's see if we'll boot it up. Yeah, not quite. Okay, so here we are. Oh, because we have 4999 on the port number, that's where it's booting up. That's fine. Okay, so now we go to /players. There's our error message. All we have to do is just follow the error message. Template not found, players.html. Let's create it. Views, new file, players.html. And then, okay, it's blank. Hello world. Hello players.html, just to make sure we are rendering this file. Great. And now what do we want to do? Well, we have access to this player names, okay? So what we should do is, I think it's, is it percentage? Actually, let's do this. Let's just Google it. Jinja for loop. Okay. So I just Googled it, and it tells us. So we want to start with this. For loops start with this, and then end with this. So this looks pretty good. So start with this. So for, let's think about what we got. For player name in player names. So that's how it starts, and then it tells us we end with this. And then in the middle, we can put our like li elements, right? And that will be maybe the player name, okay? And let's put a ul around it. And I like to fix the tabbing too. Okay, so for each player name, in the list of player names, display the player name with an li. And the player names comes from here. Yeah, Anthony?
Can you have just raw HTML rather than use Jinja?
Well, you
I
can,
don't know
but
if you explain this.
well, there's
Yeah.
but you can't access the data then. You know, the whole reason why we're doing this is to like access the data, or to say like loop through, right? So instead of doing like writing 3 LIs, because imagine like there's like 100 different player names, you know, and like as our data, eventually we're going to attach this to a database, and as like we get, you know, players enter or leave the league, we don't want to update our page every single time. We want this to just work, you know, update the database, and it's automatically going to do this. So and we're going to see that in a little bit, but that's the reason why it's nice to write this, you know, using code essentially, right? This is essentially Python.
Okay.
So what Jinja gives us is this ability, the fact that we can now loop and create LIs on the fly. Like, let's just see this. Maybe not. Hold on. Let's take a look here. Get to /players. We should go to /players. And maybe this is not updating.
All the players' names in the code, and it's player name in the
Oh,
template.
thank you. So this is, see that? Beautiful. Okay, great. So that, yeah, that's hard, you know, that's hard because it doesn't give us an error message. So you see the benefit of error messages? It's like they're our friend. So that failed silently. Did you guys see the issue? So I was calling this player names here, and then over in app.py, it actually is called players names. So we have a mismatch, which would have been really hard to figure out. But now we just made it consistent, and now we can loop through each player name, which is Sally, Eric, and Susan. And for each player name, create an LI and insert the player name. So now you can see those are listed. All right. Okay. So now let's link this to the database. So I have, let me show you this. We can see we have this nhl.db. Let me just show you, we'll call this like db practice.py. And we'll just work with this for a little bit, right? So import SQLite 3. Is SQLite3.connect, and then pass through, we'll connect to our nhl.db, right? And that'll be our connection. And then we'll do connection.cursor, right? We have to create a cursor for whatever reason. This is how we actually execute our code. And then let's put a breakpoint here. So this time I will have to do Python 3-i sample. What is this called? DB practice. Right? Because I want to. It's not going to stop for me. Actually, I can just do this. I can run this and it will pause right here because I'm in interactive mode. The -i. So now I'm basically right here. I have access to my cursor. And do cursor.execute. Select all from players. Limit 2, 3. Oh, and then I have to do this cursor.fetch all. So you can see here's the list of players that we have in the database. And each one of them has like an ID. It has a name, right? Things like that. So instead, let's do the all first, okay? Because what we can do, instead of having these player names be hard-coded, we can connect to the database. Let's see how we did this. So we really just did these 3 lines. So I'm going to put this in my app.py just to start here. And really what I want to do is, I think I'm going to, I forget if I have to reconnect each time. Let's just put this in here for now. So each time we will, connect to our database, create a cursor, and then we'll do cursor.execute, right? What we just did in here. Let's select all from players. And maybe we won't limit 3. Okay? And then we'll do cursor.fetch all. And these will be my player records. And then this time we can pass through the player records. Okay? And we'll call this players, I guess. And then over in here, we have to call this players. We'll see. I'm not sure how this will display. But let's think about what's going to happen. I'm going to go to /players, right? Flask will look for the /players route. It sees it here. It connects to my database. It makes the query, gets back the data, and then passes that data into the HTML, right? And then for every player, for every record in that list, because this is returning a list of tuples, right? So for every tuple in the list, display a player. Now, I don't know how well it can do at displaying like a tuple, but we'll see. Maybe it can do it. It doesn't work. Hold on. Let's try one more time. It does work. Beautiful. Okay? And you can, we can make this better, obviously. We can, remember, this is a tuple. It has, Connor or whatever. So we can do player/0 for the player name. Just select the player name. Oh, that's not the name. That's the ID. This is the name. Right? So just display the player name. So for every player in the list, just select, the data you want. We're going to clean this up eventually. But for now, this is okay. And then you can do the same thing with the show page, right? So with the show page, we can maybe take the ID of a player, right? And then call show player with ID. And then what's the query, right? We connect to the database, and we want to do select all from players. Select all from players where ID equals, I think we'll do, I'll show you this. Generally, when you call SQL, you don't want to pass through the well, we can give a lesson on this. You don't want to pass through the ID directly. You want to do it through this question mark. And then this is going to now give me back one individual player, which I can pass through here. All right? So I'm going to look for the player by the ID and then get back the tuple, pass that through here, and then we can have, our render the HTML, and it will render this. Let's just see this, and then I'll break it down some more. Like player/1. You see that? That's information about this guy. Player/2 is information about this person. So this is how, websites work, right? We go here, and it gives me back all the data, makes a query to the database, and gives us all the information about New York Yankees. Then we go to a different page and makes a query to the database, and it gives us all the information about the Boston Red Sox. So just to go back through this last one, remember, we can put a breakpoint in here to see this. So let's put a breakpoint right here, right? And then we'll refresh. So go to player/3. I'm in my breakpoint now. So I'm right here. I would like to have my code open so you can see what happened. So we should have, at this point, passed through the ID. Let's take a look at that. So the ID is 3. Then we did this cursor.execute, select all from players where the ID equals 3, right? And then we did player equals cursor.fetch1, right? So you can take a look at that. So it retrieved this guy from there. And then we did the render template player name equals this player. So we're passing through this data to the template. And then it's saying hello, and it's putting in the tuple and then the page. All right, so now we can put continue. And there's the data. Okay. All right, so this is kind of where we're going. Yeah, I mean, what I would do is, I think what I would like you to do, Postgres, I think that hung people up more than other things, was Postgres more than Flask to some degree. So, just remember, right, PSQL is basically like, when we're in the terminal, that's when anything that starts with PSQL has to be called from like the bash terminal, right? Not from the Postgres stuff. So just to get in, we can do PSQL. To get out, we can do like /. All right, this is a backslash, isn't it? It's like leaning back, I think. Anyway, /Q. And then if you want to connect directly to a database, right, you have the -D flag. So you can put something like squawk. If you already created this database, squawk development. And now this links directly to the database. Remember the U flag, the capital U flag, is for the user, right? So that's going to be, Postgres or whatever user you want to be logged in as. Okay. And remember, you can do this con info to see, hey, I'm connected to this development database as the Postgres user at this port 5432. Once you're in the database, so just to kind of top level, to list all the databases, you do this /L. You see the databases. To connect to the database, if you're not already there, is this /C. To then display all the tables is /DT. And then if you want to display details about a table, right, like display the restaurants table, it's this /D restaurants. And now you can see this information. Okay. So what we asked you to do was to do this PSQL-U for the user. So as the user Postgres, connect to the database, squawk development, and then run the file, right? The -F is for the file command. And I can just press tab. Oh, am I the right? Yeah, migrations. And then create tables.sql. So I already ran this, right? Because that's what, you can see that by the fact that I already have a table. But let's look to see, yeah, this is it, what this file does. It will drop the table, if it exists, restaurants, and then create a new table, right? So this is kind of a good idea. It's like if you're running this, you're basically trying to reset. Or initialize. So, okay, if we have a restaurants table, drop it. Otherwise, create the table if it does not exist. And then we haven't talked about indexes yet, but we create an index. We'll go through that for sure at a later time. And just note it, right here's our serial, because we want this to increment. Our our varchar, right, is basically a string. The rating is a decimal. Does this make sense? And you can see we already have these here, that was created. All right, so we don't have to run this because that's what that does. And then the next thing we needed to do was, connect. Once we run this, we then connect to the database. So we can just do PSQL and then connect to this Squawk development database. And then from here, right, we had to do the copy command, which was to copy data. I forget, I would always have to Google this. But to copy data from our file, from our CSV file, into our table. One thing you just have to pay attention to is just that you're in the right folder structure, right? You have to, when you log into Postgres, you have to be in a folder that can see this file. All right. So when you do the copy, like CSV Yelp Lunch nyc.csv, you have to be in that in this directory so that Postgres can see this file. All right, and then what I would like to do from there, once our data is loaded in, let's just connect again to Squawk development, is now just select all from whatever the table is. Is it venues? I forget, so let's take a look. It's called restaurants. Select all from restaurants. Limit 3. It's always just a good idea to take a look at your data. All right, so now we have a good idea about how this works. The next thing for me is going to be can I connect to the database from from Python? In order to do that, the first thing we have to do is just run the my requirements.txt file. So you can see I have this, right? We can cat it to take a look at what's in there. So it's saying, hey, download these 4 libraries if they don't already exist. So you can do pip3 install. So this is the tool you're using. You're using pip. This is the command you're using, and then this command takes an argument of -r. Which I forget what that means. Requirements.txt. So install all of the packages listed in this file. Okay, and one thing oftentimes confusing for people is, where does this flag go? It's going to go between the command and the argument, right? You're always seeing that pattern, believe it or not. When we run these things, you have, this is the package, this is the command, this is the argument, and then this is the optional flag. All right. So you run this, and then this will install the packages if they don't exist, including that scicopg2. And then, even though scicopg2 is on your computer, you still need to import it, because everything in a file has to be referenced somewhere, right? Every word. So if you're going to write the word scicopg2, it has to be defined somewhere. And it turns out it's defined in the package. So this is what you're importing. The .connect, you're good, because this is like an object, right? And then you're just calling a method on the object. So you can do .connect. From here, you see this? This is also very useful. If the documentation isn't coming up for you, you can press Command and highlight, put your cursor over the function. And again, we see the function, it's called the function signature, is how you use it. And then, some really nice documentation. I might just copy and paste this. Okay. And now we can just fill in the blanks. So connect to the database called, I think it was Squawk development, as the user, Postgres, and I don't think we have a password, right? And then we can do connection.cursor, and then equals to my cursor, and then maybe we'll do cursor.execute is select all from restaurants, limit 2, and then cursor.fetchAll. And this is my restaurants. So I just want to make sure, like, even without Flask or anything like that, can I connect to the database? And then let's so at this point we can just run this file because it doesn't have any Flask in it. So I can do let's go to source, and then I can do python3-i app.py, and that will take me right to the bottom of this, and I can see, are there any restaurants? Or does this break? Let's see. There's my restaurant, and that looks great. Okay? So you just you try to get some feedback as simply as possible. So, we know how to connect, and you can almost think about like the progression of the course. It's like we knew how to do this before we knew anything about Flask. So now what's next? Next is maybe to wrap this in a function called, all restaurants, or just maybe call it restaurants. And then I would, return it. I don't think this will work once we add Flask, but now at least I do have a function that returns restaurants. And if you wanted to at this point, you could test this. Just make sure when you call this function, it returns your restaurants. We can take out the limit too, because we know we're going to want all the restaurants. So now that this works, right, the next thing we can do is now we can add Flask if you want, right? So we can start importing that from Flask, import Flask, okay? And then create our Flask app, dunder name app equals, and then you can just, from here, at app.route, probably do /restaurants, okay? So let's think about what this is saying. When we go to restaurants, run this, right? And what does this do? This connects to our database, and it selects all from restaurants, actually returns them. So this is like the query, return it, then return all the restaurants. We can see if this works. Hopefully it would break, but I think it might not. So I'm forgetting something. I was about to run this file, but I want to do app.run debug equals true, right? And that's what's going to kick off my server, right? Start listening for requests. So let's exit out of here, and then we can do python3 not dash I app.py. Okay, cool. And then I just like to click on this. This makes sense, right? There's no URL found because there is no /, right? I don't have that yet. All I have is /restaurants. And that actually works. I don't know why, but it does. What we should do is, the problem here, the reason why this should not work is because restaurants, let's put a breakpoint here. So when you're trying to explore your code, right, you generally, you can put a breakpoint in the, we call this the action, or the controller action. This often works. I forget if Flask, they call it something else. You probably could call it the route. I like to call this the route, right? The routes are /restaurants. So let's call this the controller action, and then this part here is the route, or you could say this is the path, right? You go to this path. So the action is more like the function that's being called, okay? So if you want to hit your code, what you need to do is put the breakpoint here and then force Python, right? There's no way to call, normally we would just call this function, right, on normal Python. But in Flask, we have to have the browser call the function, right? The only way to call the function is to go to /restaurants, and then that will call our restaurants function and then hit our breakpoint. Okay, so that's how we can debug from there. So what you can see, we're now in line 15 of restaurants. So we're actually one line above. We're right here. And we can look at restaurants, though, and see what type it is. And you can see this is a list. No, it's a Python list, right? The reason why you generally need to return JSON, why we have this JSONify thing, is because this will return a string, right? If you do JSONify restaurants, and like this is our JSON. Oh, I need to import it. Let's say from Flask import JSONify. And now I can do this line. This thing will, I'm guessing, you see that it's like a response that can be sent back. But if we take a look at it, I'm guessing there is something. See this? This is the text. You can see what it did? It returned, it's like escaping any of the Python stuff. It's really returning strings. Like this is a really, one big string, I believe. And that's what should be returned across the internet, is really strings. And the reason why is because like the internet doesn't know about all these new programming languages that come about. All it can do, so it doesn't know about like a Python list, or it doesn't know about a Ruby list or a Java list. Like the internet was created before a lot of these languages were built. But what it does know and what it relies upon is that when it receives data from your web application, it's going to get back a string, because all programming languages have strings. So what you're doing is you're doing JSONify of this, and that basically turns your data into a string. Okay, that's why this function exists. So JSONify turns your data into a string. Or maybe even better, it says like the data from your return value. Right? This is the data we want to return to the browser, and we make sure that it's a string. So now I can, continue. I guess I can't. By the way, when I do, thanks to Mike for realizing this, when you do Python 3 app.py and then you want to shut down the server, you want to press Control-C as in cat, not Control-Z as in zebra, okay? Control-Z will put this running of the server in the background, and that's why a lot of you guys are then needing to shut it down separately. If you do Control-C, then you'll be in good shape. So let's just make sure the breakpoint is gone. It's gone. All right, and then do this and go to /restaurants. And this is good. It's actually better. Like this is the way we should have our code. Okay. So what are we doing, right? We are, when a user goes to /restaurants, you will connect to the database. You then make the query, and then return the data, return the restaurants, and then turn that data, this Python list, into a string, right? To return it. Okay. Questions about that? No? All right. Let's talk about the models. So we'll go back to our, sorry to switch context here, but we'll go back to this app, the NHL app. Oh, Serge, go ahead.
Can you please also show us how you turn the float, like the decimals and the time?
Oh, I think
that is in the JSON.
Yeah, I think you have to separately import JSON and then do something like, so the JSONify function doesn't do a good job of changing the decimals into strings. So I think you have to import this other library called JSON, which is like built into Python. So you don't have to install it, or maybe you are installing it with this simple JSON. Let's see. let's Google simple JSON. And you see this, so you do import simple JSON as JSON, and then JSON.dumps, and that will turn things. It just has a little bit extra functionality. Like you can sort, I guess, by keys, sort the keys. It just has like a little bit extra functionality. Use a decimal instead of a float. You can say, turn this into a decimal, and then maybe there's something about default. I think for us it's like default equals string or something. So basically all I did to figure this out was I just Googled. I saw the error, like somehow we're having an issue returning returning a decimal. And so I Googled, how do I do this? So I'll do import simple JSON as JSON. And then I think we need to do JSON.dumps the data. So like JSONify the data. And then there's probably something. See this? Default is a function that should return a serialized version of an object. It's not exactly what we want. We'll do this default equals str. So basically the problem that some people probably got was that JSONify doesn't know how to, this JSONify function we were using previously doesn't know how to convert decimals into a string. But this other library does. So that was the reason for using this library. It might have been updated. Like I wasn't seeing this bug this time around. Or maybe Flask is updated. I don't know. But that should do it. Let's see. I'll go to /restaurants. Oh, okay. Yeah, I don't know. They both worked fine. We can but that's all you had to really do. It's not like a key thing, so I don't want to spend too much time on it. It's just like a little bug I ran into. All right, let's talk about incorporating our models. So essentially, we're just working. The issue is when we're working with this data right here, it's not very pleasant to work with like one long tuple, right? That is not how we would structure our data, like given the choice. I prefer to work with objects, or dictionaries would be one step better. Even better is objects. Objects generally are going to make our code more easy to use. We get the ability to like put functions in our classes, as we know. Like they're easy to test. Like we have no problem like really like testing classes. So like that's generally what you want to do. So let's go back to this. Is there a way for me to see where I am? Hold on. I want to go back to this NHL. Oh, here I am in the NHL app. Okay, so we're in this database. Let's just boot this thing up and remember where we are. So do Python 3 app.py. That is going to run this app, and I can just click here. So this hit our hello everyone, and we want to go maybe to /player/1, something like that. Okay, so this is returning, this tuple. Really, it's returning some HTML. We can have it return a tuple simply by having this be JSONify. Right? JSONify the player. And then just import JSONify if we're not already. It looks like we are. So let's just refresh this. And it breaks. And we'll just boot this up again. Okay, so this is good. So we're returning this, but it's not, this is not ideally how we want to return JSON. We want to have these things mean something. Like, what does this 27 mean? We don't know. So what we have to do is, basically, we want to take this data that we get, and we want to feed it into a class. Okay? So I'm going to create a new file called player.py, and then do class player. Right, and then do def init self and pass through some, maybe a record. I'll call this a record. and then put maybe like a breakpoint here. Okay. So now here's what we'll do. We get back this data, and we're going to initialize the player class with the data. I'll call this player record. All right. We immediately see this squiggly line here, and the reason why is because we're not like, where is this defined in our file? Right? It's not, doesn't show up anywhere in our file. So we have to say from the player file, I believe, import player. Okay. So let's run this, and see what happens. Actually, I'm going to put one more breakpoint here. So now we'll boot this up, and we want to hit these breakpoints. So that means we need to call this function, and to call this function, we need to go to /player/some ID. So we'll go to /player/2. That's fine. And now we're hitting our breakpoint. You can see that right here. So where's our first breakpoint? It's app.py line 18. It's right here. It should have gotten our player record. Let's take a look. So it got this guy, Kevin Hayes. Then we can continue, and that will call our class, right? Initialize a new instance of a player. And then we'll be right here. Okay. So type continue. And now where are we? Player.py line 3. So we're right here. Let's take a look at the record. So there's our data. Okay. Now what we can do, you can start like taking the data. Like if you look at self is a player object because we're right here. And what we can start doing is doing something like self, like 0 equals, or sorry, this would be record square bracket 0, right? And do something like self.id equals record square bracket 0, and then you can look, and we should have set that property, and we can do self.name equals this record square bracket 1. So we can do this. It's a little cumbersome, right? So instead what I would do is maybe set a class variable called like, your attributes or your columns, right? I forget which one I call it. I think columns. All right, and then you'll just set it here. It'll be ID, name. I forget his data. Let's take a look at the CSV file if we have it. We don't have it. So we'll basically, what we'll do is we're going to set some data here. Do I have any example? Let's boot this up one more time. Do I have my breakpoints in here? I do. Okay, so we're gonna look at this. So we'll hit the URL /players localhost. Sorry, I'll just click on this. /players /2. That hits our breakpoint. We can see the player record, and we are here. So let's just copy this. This way we can get an idea of the data. So I'm just going to define what the keys are. Okay, so it's the ID, the name, his age, let's say. I'm not quite sure, but we'll just make it up. His height, his weight, his handedness. He's left-handed or right-handed. Hometown, birthday, and number. Okay. All right. And now we'll do this one more time. So let me just Control-C. Do this. We'll hit our thing. So we're in the player record. We're about to initialize the player instance. So now we'll just do continue. So right now we are in this line, and we're about to initialize a new player instance, passing through our player record data. And then this is going to hit our player class and will be in the init function. All right? So we'll do continue. And now we are right here, and we have you can see the two arguments. We have our record, which is that player record, and we have, and we have self. Oh, don't do that. For whatever reason, this is like refreshing the site. It's really annoying. But here's what we have. We have this record that's passed through. So I'll just put it, copy and paste it here. So how are we going to, what I'd like to do is when we create a new player object in here, we want to set the data, right? We want to set like self.id equals this first value and self.name equals this second value. And the way that I can do something like this is I can zip together the self.columns, right, with the record. So what this will create, remember what zip does, is this will create like a list of tuples. So we'll have ID, that's the first value, comma, 2. And then we'll have, the name, or sorry, we'll have, name, and that will be with Kevin Hayes. All right, so that's what's happening here. So let's see that. We'll call this like my paired data. And then let's just put a breakpoint here. We'll remove this one. And we'll remove this. Right, we can comment this out if you want. So we're in this breakpoint in player.py, line 7. At this point, we have hit this route. We have selected the data where the ID is 3. We then returned it from the database. We've then initialized a new player with that tuple that we get back. And now we're right here. So we have the tuple is passed through from here, right? And now we are like right here. And if we look, we'll see there's my record, right? And then self.columns is this, and we can zip these together. Self.columns, comma, the record. And let's just make it a little easier to see by turning this into a list. Shoot, do I have to do interact? There you go. All right, so this is now our paired data. You see this? Age 27, height 6'5", whatever. And we can even turn this into a dictionary. See that? Because a list of tuples can easily be turned into a dictionary. One last thing. If you look at self.dunderdict, it's empty. Right? This is our instance. This is our player instance. We can set all these attributes at once by doing self. Here's my paired data. We'll just copy this line. Sorry, we'll make it more visible. We're doing this list. And then we can turn this thing into a dictionary. And I'll call this my attributes. So you have this dictionary. What the heck? Sorry. Why did that happen? Oh, weird.
I think it's because when you initially created the zip, it expended the generator.
Okay. So
like a one-time thing.
Yeah, let's do this thing. Let's do this. Okay, and then we can turn this into a dictionary and call this my attributes. Right, and now what we can do is here's my self.dunderdict. These are the attributes of my instance, and I want them to equal these attributes, right? The attributes that I created by taking the columns and the data from the database and turning that into ultimately a dictionary. Then I'll just do self.dunderdict equals these attributes. And once I do that, you'll see I can do something like self.name. Right? Because now all my attributes are set just the way that I want, right? I can do self.h. So I'm returning exactly the kind of instance I want now at this point. Let me just code this in here, and then I'm happy to take some questions. So we are taking the data. Somebody goes here. We retrieve the data from the database. This is returning a tuple, right? Then we're passing that tuple into here, and we're getting back this data, right? Like this is the record. Then we're going to take these columns, pair them with the record, and turn that into a dictionary. I'll call this my attributes. Then we want to set this data on the instance, so I can do self.dunderDict equals that dictionary of attributes. And that's really it, right? At that point, if I now look at my player, and put a breakpoint here, you'll see that I do have, I should have this guy initialized. And this won't just work, obviously, for Kevin Hayes. This will work for any of my data. So I'll boot this up, and we'll go to player / like 10 or something. And it breaks. Incorrect bindings supplied. Select all from ID. Maybe there is no 10. Ah, that worked. I think there just was no 10. So now, if we look at player, there's my player object. And I can do player.name, Travis, player.id, 3, right? So the way that this worked, right, was we hit this number 3. It got passed through, the ID was passed through here. We selected the player where ID is 3. We got the tuple. We then turned it into an instance by passing through the tuple here, and then pairing this tuple with the columns and turning that into a dictionary, and then setting that dictionary as the attributes of the instance. So if you do player.dunderDict, you can see where this is. And then basically we can do the same thing. Like you can't just return an object from from your controller action, but you can just do this. You can just basically get the attributes from this instance and JSONify it. So that's essentially the end. And now we have a couple minutes for questions. Right, so this works. Now our JSON looks a lot better, right? Not only that, but we're using, as our code gets more complicated, it's going to be a lot nicer to be using classes more often, okay, using instances more often. So a big point of this is to turn our messy, like tuple, into a nice object. Yeah, William, was your question, is that about the generator?
Yeah, I was just curious what made that generator what returns the generator object.
That's the zip function.
The zip does that. Okay.
Yeah.
So what when you go to the next item in the generator, it just does the next like tuple or what?
Well, I'm not really going. You mean this? Like the next thing that comes is this part, the dict.
Yeah, but a generator like steps through like each item. I was just curious what it was returning like each time, just out of curiosity inside the data type or whatever. Like, is it just the next? Or is what I'm saying?
We're not. It does, but we're not iterating through it. You know what I mean? Like we're not iterating through this data. We're just using it to pair it like this. Like we're taking this data, and then we're pairing it so that it goes into this. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Right, and then we're turning the just for everyone else as well. And then we're taking this, turning into a dictionary, so that now we then have this ID of 2. Name, right, of Kevin. Then we take this data, this is our attributes, and then we set this attributes on the instance right here. It's certainly complicated, Yeah, Serge.
Like I still don't understand like why, like when you like when you wrote self.columns, I still don't understand why it didn't basically put this data on the instance. Like if you put like a breakpoint right after init, def init, like self doesn't have any attribute.
Oh, why are there columns here?
No, so like if you put the breakpoint right, yeah, there.
So how can I do self.columns is the question, right?
Yeah, like
yeah.
So like
I'll show you.
Mm-hmm.
So okay. So now we're right here. How do we hit this breakpoint? We can do so by running this, right? Because this is what's going to initialize a player in the controller, and then that will call it, and so then we'll be good. So let's refresh this. And it's a great question, right? It's a good brain teaser. Why can we call self.columns here? The reason why, because Serge is pointing out, if you look at self, then you look at self.dunderdict, there is no columns attribute. But the way Python works is it will first look for the attribute on the instance, and then if it doesn't find it, it will go to self.class. It'll look for it on the class, so the player class, and the player class does have a columns attribute right here. So that's what happens. So it doesn't find on the instance, but then it looks for it on the class, finds it on the class, and it's good. Okay. Cool. So that's, that just to show you kind of one last thing. If you want to do this for all the players, this is returning a list of tuples. So basically we did it for one, right? So now the next step is basically do it for all. So for record in player records, you want to initialize a player instance with that data. Right? Like now this is returning a list of tuples, the stuff for Kevin Hayes, right? And then the stuff for Travis Konechny, right? All this stuff. For each one of them, we're going to, for each tuple in here, we're going to pass it through the player class, right? Initialize a new player object. And then we are going to, so we can call this my players. And then finally, if you want, we can then turn each of those players into dictionaries and JSONify it. So I don't even know what to call this, like player JSON or something like that. For player in players, we'll just do player.dunderdict, right? Turn each of them into dictionaries, and then we can JSONify that. We'll split this up. This player dictionaries, and then we'll just pass that through. Okay. So let's just put a breakpoint here. This way we can see the steps. So we'll go to /players, and now we hit our breakpoint. And we are, I like putting my breakpoint at the very end, like right before the end of the function. This way I get access to everything else. So you can see what happens. Here I do player records. This is just a list of tuples, right? Each thing here is a tuple. Then we take each of these player records and we initialize a new player object with it, right? For each of the tuples, pass it through the player. So now if we look at players, they are instances. And then for each of these players, we call dunderdict on it to then turn them into a list of dictionaries. So now you can see that. So we went from tuples to instances to dictionaries, and then we JSONify our dictionaries. All right. So we can do continue at this point. And here's our /players route. Right. You can see this again looks better. All right, so that's the next set. That's the next lesson if you got into it in the next lab. All right, cool. So this is where we'll pick up. I'll let you guys continue with the readings and labs. We'll take our break now, and then pick up with this after dinner or lunch, whatever it is for you all. All right, have a good one. So maybe we'll copy. Let's just copy this code. Can I paste this in here? All right. So this is, does it? Here we go. This is code, right? Like from our controller, from the player's route. And if you think about how this works, first you can imagine like this. This is the user. The user is going to go to www.espn.com/players. Okay. So this is the user's browser, right? He goes there. Then from there, this goes, through the internet till it goes to like one of the computers, generally like on Amazon, on AWS. So it goes through the wires to AWS and on that computer, right? And then it finds the port where basically this is listening, which is like for us like port 5000 / players. Okay, so it looks through this route. So this is really the first location in the app that everything's going to start, is in your what we call like, this whole file right here. We call this the controller. Okay, so it's going to go into your. This is the computer, and then the first thing it goes to in your application is this controller file, which for us I guess we call it like app.py. Other frameworks might call it controller.py or controller.rb if this is Ruby. And it finds and it looks down the list in app.py and it finds the matching route, right? /players. Then what happens next? Essentially, we go to what's called like the model layer. Okay, the model layer is really like both the database and the what we've said so far is like the class, right? So for us, this will be like the database and the player. Okay, so far it's in sequence, right? So far it's like DB, select all from players, and then we go and we create a player instance for each record. Okay, so we can and you can think of the model like, in other words, you can think of like your class as being very close, very tied to the database. So this is our model, and the model layer, and that's kind of, can I draw a line from here to here? Okay, and the model layer is like really close to the database, right? So for us, this is like a player.py file, right? And then in the database, it's, the players table. So this is, again, let's just call this, this my controller. And you can think of it as my controller calls the model, or really like executes some SQL and calls the model. The model oftentimes is very closely related, to the database. And you can see that in the model, because if you look at, is it in, oh, it's right here. If you look at our model, right, this class is called the model. You can look at this. We have something called columns. It has ID, name, right? It directly matches the columns of our database. So it's very close to the database. And you can think of, every player instance essentially corresponds to a record in our database, right? Like there's like a very, the similarity between like an instance of a player and a row in our database. So this is our controller, and our controller will, let's take a look at it. Our controller will, the first thing it basically does is connect to our model layer, where we retrieve data from the database and we then initialize new classes. From there, the job, now that we've retrieved the data, so that's everything above here, retrieve the data. The next thing is to send it to the user. And that's what we're doing here, is we're getting ready to, turn these instances into dictionaries and then JSONify it. Right? So in the Miro app, this is now going back, right? Here's the user makes a request, asks for the players. Our application says, okay, you're asking for players. I'm going to retrieve it from the database. And then what happened? And then we basically get that list from here. We have all that code to, make a new player with the player record. And then what do? We send it back. That's the return value, is sending this back, right? That's this part right here. We want to send this back to the user, to their browser. So you can kind of, sorry, I was supposed to connect to here. Yeah, it doesn't let me do it. But this is called, if you and let's just flip this. Okay, so this is called the request response cycle. Okay, which we saw, with APIs, where the user makes a request by going to espn.com/players, right? He's asking for this data. The controller takes a look, sees the request. Then here's our model layer where we get the data from the database. So we have to go to our class and also our database. And then eventually we send this back to the browser in the form of JSON, right? So what we send back is, JSON. In other words, it's that list of dictionaries. Right? ID 1, and the name is, whatever, Con or something, right? It's that list of dictionaries. This JSON is oftentimes called like the view because it's what the user sees, okay? It could be HTML, it could be JSON, it doesn't matter. What we call this is the view, all right? So you make a request, the user makes a request, he goes to espn.com, the controller handles the request, right? It says, oh, you want /players. It goes to the model, retrieves data from the database, and then once it gets that data, sends that back to JSON, or as JSON, sends back essentially this view layer as JSON or HTML. This sequence is, if we go, it's so valuable. It's in the syllabus. It's at the very front of the syllabus. You'll see that we have this model. I'm having issues with my internet, but you'll see a diagram of this in the syllabus, and this is called model view controller, right? It doesn't happen in that. It's kind of confusing, that phrase. So if you ever hear MVC, right, that's model view controller, okay? And this is the pattern for building websites, is we have this model layer, which is basically our data, okay? And we saw that both with like the class player and the table player. You have the view layer, that's like the JSON or HTML, and you have the controller, which essentially ties it all together. Okay. One way that it's been like described, like one analogy I've heard about this is kind of like if you think of a restaurant, you think of like, a patron, a customer going in and ordering something off the menu. This is what they want. The controller is kind of like the waiter, that goes and says, okay, I'm going to get that from the back of the house, right? And that's the model, and that's the database. And then finally, you know, so the controller gets it from the back of the house and then serves it back to the user in the form of like data or HTML. All right, but it's the same thing. So again, all this logic, if you really want to like test yourself, do you understand this? It's really like, do you understand this code, right? We're defining the route that a customer can ask for this data from. We connect to the database. We retrieve the data from the database. We then initialize a player instance for each record in the database, right? For each player record. This is all the model layer right here. And then this is our view layer. We now convert each of those players to a dictionary so we can send it back for the user to see it, right, as JSON. Okay? So, you know, this is the waiter, right? This controller action receives the request, goes to the back of the house to get it, and then presents it back to the customer or the user. Questions about that? I'll provide a better diagram. I think it's in the syllabus. It's a better diagram. And I also have another one in Miro, I believe. But this is a very, like if you guys go on, you know, this course prepares you not only for like data engineering, but also back-end engineering roles. And like a lot of, you know, multiple students have gotten back-end engineering roles from this course. So a very typical question in web development is to like explain the request response cycle or explain MVC, right? Meaning model view controller. These are kind of almost, you can basically answer these questions the same way. And what you're explaining is this process. Okay? So you want to be able to go through every line and explain kind of why. Why are we doing this? Why? Okay? From, you know, it's only 10 lines right here. But if you can explain each of these 10 lines, you're in very good shape. All right? And we're going to, you know, we'll keep work. We're not done. You know, we're going to be, as you all know, we're going to be staying here for a while. But still, like, start now. Try and explain this. You can Google model view controller. Look at it on Wikipedia. Look at the request response cycle on Wikipedia. Right? You'll find the language for explaining this. Add this to your notes. Right?